Okay. We'll get started. I'll talk for a bit, and then I'll take a few questions. Okay.
Phạt đi. Phải phạt tiền.
Đi.
Cái việc mình vừa nãy chơi thì không nhìn, bây giờ kêu. Vừa nãy đừng có chơi nữa. Đây ở Nga đây.
Okay, so I can't type and talk very well, so if I go quiet for a minute, that's just because I'm typing something on the whiteboard that I'll talk about afterwards. Okay, so first of all, a debate. So, a debate in general is just a structured conversation between two opposing sides or viewpoints. Basically, meaning it's a conversation where there are rules that need to be followed. And generally speaking, that conversation is between two different teams, and each of those teams has a different opinion or a different viewpoint on the topic of the debate. Now, up the top, you see I've written Asian parliamentary or AP debate format.
Sao không nghe tiếng gì?
Okay, so AP debate or Asian parliamentary debate is a certain format or a type of debate. And the reason we're focusing on this one is because it's most commonly used in debating competitions around the world, pretty much. So AP debate is a format that features two teams, and those teams can have usually between 3 to 5 members. So the debate itself only requires three members per team to participate, and each team can have up to 2 reserves. And those reserves, they're usually sitting in the audience while the debate takes place, and they'll usually be taking a few subtle notes so that moving forward in the competition, the teams can have a better idea of the opponents they'll be facing. So if you're in the debate, you're actively participating, coming up with arguments, finding evidence to support your case, all of that goodness. And the reserves, they don't participate in the debate, but they help their team out wherever they can if they've not been rostered into the debate. Thomas, do you have a question? Nope. Okay. So we mentioned that AP debate, or that debate is a structured conversation between two teams. And so when we talk about structured conversation and that there are rules, there are certain certain rules, certain limitations put on speakers, and I'll go ahead and list all of the important ones now. Okay, so the way that the first thing is that the teams will deliver their arguments in a staggered order. So it's not just all of one team and then all of the other team. They go one member from the first team, one member from the second team, one member from the first team, one member from the second team. And this gives you the chance to create lots of what we like to call clashes in a debate. And this is basically the teams break their arguments down into digestible chunks, and that gives the other team a chance to uh, come back with rebuttals, come up with counter arguments, and try and discredit and disprove the other team. Okay, so the two teams, generally speaking, we've got the proposition team, which may also be known as the affirmative team or the government. They agree with the topic of the debate and they argue in its favor. So they try and convince you the topic of the debate is correct. We agree with it and we think it's the right thing to do. And then you've got the opposition team or the negative team, and they disagree with the motion. They argue against it, and the way that they do that, we'll go into it in a little bit more detail later, is they try and shift the definition of the topic of the debate. Because as we know with language, there are multiple ways that we can understand things that people say to us. And so if you can change people's understanding of the topic of the debate, you can completely shift their understanding and their belief of it. So we'll go into detail about that more often a bit later. Give me just one moment. So I'm going through several folders of notes that I've got to find. Okay. Now, this next bit comes from a fantastic question I got asked in this morning's session. And that question was, what do you do if you don't agree with the topic of the debate? And I'll type the answer out to that, and then I'll talk about it, then I'll take a few questions. So don't worry, Thomas, I do see you there. Okay, so you'll not always be arguing the same side of the debate that you believe. Sometimes you will have to do research, create arguments, and defend a point of view that you personally do not share. And so the point of this is, sorry, I should say, the point of a debate is not actually to convince the judges and everybody in the audience that your point of view is right. Really, what you're showing the judges and showing everybody is how well you can think critically, work as a team, develop an argument for a point of view, even if you don't share it personally. So yeah, so even if you are even if you are having to defend a viewpoint that you don't believe, it's just for the debate, and you just have, yeah, you just have to do the work, develop the arguments, and develop the case. Okay. So I'll take some questions now. Thomas, do you? Yep, there
Hi,
you are.
sir. I chat you.
Pardon?
Hi, sir. Can I private chat you?
Can you send that to me in the chat box, please, Thomas? I couldn't hear you very well. Okay. So the next thing, so the last thing that I'll put down in this for this whiteboard before we move on. Okay, so when we're having an AP debate, the order of the events will go. So we see here from 1 to 8, the first 6 speeches, they alternate. They go the first speaker for the proposition, first speaker for the opposition, second speaker for the proposition, second speaker for the opposition, so on and so forth. But then we get down to number 7 and number 8, and we see that the orders have been flipped. So the opposition will deliver their reply speech first, and then the proposition will deliver their reply speech last. So these are the two sections or the two parts of a debate. And that first part is called the substantive speeches. And the second part is called the reply speeches. Okay. So do we have any questions about the format of a debate? Okay. If you do have any questions, guys, just make sure that you do raise your hand so that I can see it. All right. So, there's no more questions about the if there's no more questions about the format of the debate, let's go into a bit more detail about the members of the two teams. Give me a moment just to get this set up. Do you have a question, Thomas? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so we have the three speakers from each team here. So this first section of the debate is where the speakers will deliver their substantive speeches. Okay, so this is the portion of the debate that both teams deliver all of their all of their arguments that they wish to present in the debate. So this is essentially the debate itself. And it's important that when you become part of a debating team, it's very important that you don't just, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't just sit down to the debate as three individual speakers, just delivering your own arguments. That won't work very well. What you need to do is work with your teammates, and you need to fulfill your role on the team. And so those 6 roles what we're going to talk about now. So both teams actually have fairly similar jobs to each other. Okay, so the first person to speak is the first proposition speaker. By the way, guys, depending on which tournaments you may decide to enter at a later date, you will need to know all of the possible names for both of the teams. Each team, so some competitions call them by proposition and opposition. Some competitions will call the teams by affirmative and negative. And in some instances, some competitions may call the affirmative team, they may call it the government, and they may call the opposition team will just stay the opposition. But you need to know all of those different ways that the teams are called so that you always know which side of the debate you're representing. So first up, we have our first proposition speaker. And the first proposition speaker, if the competition you're in calls it by government and opposition, then the first proposition speaker may also be known as the Prime Minister. So if you think about it like a parliamentary debate where the government are debating about new laws to put on the books if they need them, it's the Prime Minister that will usually always prescribe the new law, or they will prescribe the motion. Okay, so the first proposition speaker, they have a very important job to do, and it's their job to actually define the debate and set the tone for their team. Now, this can actually be a very big advantage to have, because a little example I like to use because I've fallen victim to it so many times, but how many times have you, and it doesn't matter whether you read it in a book, saw it on TV, you're talking to a friend, I bet most of you have been through something like this, but you hear the wrong information first, but even when you hear the right information later on, or at a later date, even though it may have been proved to you, like you might have seen all the evidence in the world, there's still that thing in your brain that's like, but I heard that other one first, that still sounds more right to me, even though you're being presented with evidence why the second piece of information is actually correct. That's happened to me a lot, and that's actually a very valuable, I suppose you might say, human shortfall that the proposition team gets to take advantage of. Because they get to speak first. So they basically get to, I suppose, set the standard for the debate. They get to set the tone for the debate. And they basically get to define the motion, or they get to tell you what the motion means to them first. And it is quite often when you speak first, again, you tend to have that thing where people don't want to forget what you've said. So that's quite a big advantage for the proposition team to have. So it's the first proposition speaker's job basically to introduce the team's most important arguments. So it's up to the first speaker of the team to go, okay, this is our team, these are the arguments we're making, and they need to make all of the big arguments first. You need to get the judges and the audience on your side immediately. Next, we come to the first opposition speaker. Okay, so the first opposition speaker is usually known as the opposition leader, and this stems from most parliamentary most parliamentary debates where you've got the side of the government with the prime minister, and then you've got the opposition who make sure that the government don't go crazy with power, basically. And so they're known as the opposition to the government. Okay, so the opposition leader or the first opposition speaker. So their job is equally important as the first proposition speaker, because in fact, you might even consider it slightly more important because it is the opposition leader's job to redefine the debate in a more positive light for the opposition team. So what that means is they have, and they do that by doing two things. Number one, they try to prove that the arguments made by the proposition speaker that they're not right. They need to try and disprove them, discredit them, make them look weak and ineffective, essentially. So, for example, the example that I used in this morning's class was punching somebody. So the debate the debate topic, for example, would be, is it okay to punch somebody? And so the opposition, so if the proposition speaker makes the case and says, no, it is not all right to just punch anybody. Doesn't matter. It's not all right. Hitting somebody is wrong. The opposition could then reframe that and say, well, what if somebody's already punching me? Am I allowed to punch them back in self-defense? So that could be, bless you, Thomas. That could be the redefining of the debate. So we're taking it from, well, it's not all right to just hit people. But then we say, but what about if someone is hitting us first? Can we defend ourselves? So that's posing that question slightly differently. And that's what you aim to do as the opposition team, is redefine the topic of the debate so that you can come up with, so that you can create arguments and find evidence to support them, regardless of the topic. And then the other job that the opposition speaker must do, the first opposition speaker, is they must deliver their most important arguments for their team. So do we see there in just the first two speakers how we've got, how we're already starting to create some clashes of ideas and some clashes of definitions there? That's what we want to do in debate, is we always want to try and find an issue or a problem or another way to think about what your opponents are saying, and then try and change how the judges see what they're saying. That's what we've got to do essentially. Are there any questions about the first two speakers so far? Very good. I'll take that as a no. So we move on to the second proposition speaker. Okay. So second proposition speaker is also known as the Deputy Prime Minister. The Deputy Prime Minister is basically the same thing as a Vice President. They're just like second in charge. And if the president needs to step down, then the Vice President would take over. Okay, so it's the job of the Deputy Prime Minister or the second proposition speaker to get the debate back on track for the proposition team. So we heard from the Prime Minister first, who laid the groundwork. We then heard from the leader of the opposition, whose job it was to try and muddy the waters a bit, make it try and weaken the proposition team's arguments, try and prove them wrong, try and prove them ineffective, and then try and strengthen their own case by delivering their most important arguments. Now we come back to our second proposition speaker, or the Deputy Prime Minister, and it's their job to try and get the debate back in the favor of their own team. So you see there why it's important to stagger the speakers, one from each team, and then they interchange. Because if we just heard from the proposition team first, they could build the best case, but without an opportunity to defend themselves through these rebuttals, then you can very, very easily dismantle a case. So it's very important that it's a back and forwards exchange. The second opposition speaker Sorry, just having an argument with my mouse here. Don't mind me. There we go. I did it again. Sorry, guys. I told you I'm not very good with this. This thing, every time I let go of the drag thing, it seems to do things I didn't ask it to do. There we go. Okay, so the second opposition speaker, also known as the deputy opposition leader, it's their job to once again try and get the debate back on track for their teams. They've got to try and convince the judges and the audience to swing back in favor of the opposition team and their point of view. And they do this much the same way as the Deputy Prime Minister. They rebut the arguments made by the Deputy Prime Minister, try and offer counter arguments to it. I should probably explain that too. So a rebuttal in a debate is your answer to, a rebuttal is your answer to an argument posed by the other team. So if they make their points good and strong, your job is then to rebut those arguments and try and find weak spots in them so that the judges and the audience don't believe in them, basically. You've got to try and find problems with their audience, with their arguments. Excuse me. And then you've got to strengthen your own team's position by delivering the rest of your arguments. Oh, excuse me. And now we move on to the third proposition speaker. Okay, and our third speakers, I don't know why yet, but I've got to find this answer out for the other class and then I'll tell you guys. But I haven't yet discovered why they call the third speaker the whip. So we've got the government whip and then we've also got the opposition whip. Okay, so we have the third proposition speaker, also known as the government whip. So this speaker's job is to summarize their team's argument and talk about their team's strongest arguments and compare them to the weakest arguments of the opposing team. So people can say a lot in the short time they're given to speak during a debate. So it's almost impossible for the judges and the audience to remember all of the to remember just all of the good things from their team. So it's the third speaker's job to make it easier on everyone and remind us all. So the third speaker will mention things like uh, our our second speaker, sorry, the oh yeah, our second speaker made a strong argument by when they said this, and then they'll say the argument. But our opponents did not have a rebuttal or anything to disprove that argument. So that's a point in our favor. So yeah, so you want to talk about all of the things that they did wrong and all of the things that your team did right during the debate. And then yeah, so again, that's just one final chance to remind the judges what your team did very well and to try and keep it in the judges' minds about what the other team didn't do so well. So you're kind of playing a salesman a little bit as the third speaker, because you're basically trying to say why your team's so good, why the other team's not as good as you. And then we finally move to the third opposition speaker. Or also known as the opposition whip. All right. So the important thing to note about both of the third speakers is that neither of the third speakers may introduce a new argument, but they are allowed to introduce new evidence and new examples to help further strengthen arguments that their first two speakers have already made. Yeah, so and that probably is the most important thing is that, yeah, so you can't make any new arguments to make your team's case bigger, but again, you can introduce more evidence to prove the points that your team have already made. So yeah, so they are the roles of the 6 debaters in any debate. Do we have any questions about this before we move into the reply speech portion? No, fantastic. I've just got a few notes here too. Okay, so the substantive speeches versus the reply speeches. So these are the two parts of the debate that I mentioned earlier. So a substantive speech is a speech made during the debate. So this is where the speakers will make their arguments, present their evidence, and build their case. These speeches make up about 80 to 90% of the actual debate. So this is most of what you are doing. And depending on the competition that you enter, they will give you usually somewhere between 4 and 7 minutes to deliver your arguments. I've seen some debates go as low as 2 minutes and some debates go as high as like 10 to 12 minutes per speaker. And it may sound like a lot, but once you actually start writing your arguments and you're trying to make sure you leave time for rebuttals against the other team and all of the other things you've got to do, that time actually flies by very quickly. So yeah, always make sure that you are prepared with some talking points. Okay. Now we move on to the other speech involved in a debate, which is the reply speech. Excuse me. Okay, so a reply speech is each team's chance to present their interpretation of how the debate went overall. So it's more of a report than a speech. So what that means is that when the third speaker in the debate is delivering the speech, is delivering their summary, they should be sticking purely to the arguments listed during the debate. So our opposing team, for example, our opposing team said, made this argument, made this claim, and supported it with this evidence. However, our team counter-argued and insert argument here, and then our evidence, so the evidence that we used in this argument shows that this argument made by our opposing team is not necessarily like it's old, it's out of date, it doesn't apply anymore. You're just trying to find a reason as to why that argument shouldn't count, but within the confines of the debate. However, during the reply speech, you're allowed to speak a lot more like you're delivering a report. So you can talk about more specific things. So for example, in the reply speech, it might be, the other team tried to, sorry, I've just gone blank here. Yeah, during this reply speech, you're trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? You're talking about the debate more like you're a commentator. That's a better way to put it. You know how when you watch a soccer match and you've got the commentators talking about the match going on, that's kind of how you would, that's kind of how you would deliver this reply speech. So, for example, you would talk about the things that went well for your team. So any arguments that they made, any arguments that your team made that the opposition, that your opponents did not have a rebuttal for, they did not have a counter argument, you mention that in your reply speech, because you say to the judges, hey, look at this. We made a perfectly valid point, supported it with evidence, and the other team could not say anything to disprove that argument. That looks very good on your behalf. Or if you might say the other way around, the other team made an argument, but the other team made an argument, but we instantly had a rebuttal to negate that argument. So that's a good point for us. So yeah, you're just looking for things that happened in the debate that will make your team look good and the other team look bad. So each team will usually get somewhere between 2 to 4 minutes to deliver their reply speech. And the reply speeches actually happen in reverse order. So we've noticed that up to now, you've noticed up to now, it's always gone first proposition speaker, then opposition speaker. Proposition first, opposition second. But when we get to the reply speeches, we do it in reverse order. So the opposition team will deliver their reply speech first, and then the proposition team will deliver their reply speech last. And so because of that, there's a rule in debates, at least in AP debate, that no speaker may speak twice in a row. There always has to be someone else in between speakers. So for that reason, the third speaker of either team is not allowed to give the reply speeches. So it either has to be the first or the second member of the team that will give the reply speech. Okay, so do we have any questions, anything at all? No, terrific. Then in that case, I would like to spend the last few minutes. So, all right, so we're going to spend the last few minutes covering the last topic for today, which is strategies for developing good arguments for when you've got to participate in a debate. So we won't have time for the breakout room exercise today because the breakout room exercise is based around what we're about to cover. So this one, we can open it up for suggestions from students if you'd like to participate as well, if you'd like to contribute an answer. So these are all just different strategies that you can use to, or different things you can do to make sure you're as prepared as possible. Ken. Okay. So the first thing is,
Seems like Ken is having connecting issue.
Oh,
I think so. I think so. I'll give him a chance to ask if he comes back online.
I want my battery is running.
Ah, bloody hell.
What do you say?
Just couldn't remember the name of one of the apps that I was typing in here. So the first thing is work out a way to keep in touch with your teammates. So be that a private chat on Messenger, if you use Zalo, if you use Discord, or even if you just all have each other's phone numbers saved and you can send text messages to a group chat. But you want to make sure that it is always a group chat with your own teammates, because if you have a piece of information you need to share with everyone, let's say you just send it to one other teammate and then forget to send it to the other one, then that leaves, like, that's not good, because that other teammate might need to know that information. So always make sure you communicate in a central group where everyone in your team receives all of the communication. So number 2 is to hold some mutually agreed on team meetings. So mutually agreed on means that before the meeting has taken place, every member of the team has said, yes, I can attend this meeting at this time. Because again, if one team member cannot attend, even if you give them notes, still ideas, lines of conversation that have taken place, that every team member should be there for, because something someone says may just spark an idea in another teammate. You bounce ideas off of each other. And yeah. So number 3. So number 3 is brainstorm intensively. So what brainstorm means, if you've never heard of it, it's a great activity for getting a lot of messy ideas down on paper, and then that makes the process easier to start tidying the ideas up and putting them into their correct categories and stuff. So basically, if I draw it here, I'm just going to draw a little make-believe brainstorm. So you might have the central topic in the center here. And then all around it, you just have a conversation with your teammates and anyone that has, so for example, actually, I'll undo that. So the example is the topic is technology. So to brainstorm, basically any ideas you have about this idea here, technology, you write them down on the paper. So I might say, okay, so computers, video games, YouTube, robotics. So all of these different ideas that you have about this one topic, you write them all down on the sheet of paper. And this, it may not seem like much, but it will help you come up with so many good ideas that you didn't even think about. Because if you can find any ideas that are on the topic of the debate, again, you don't know which ideas are going, which ideas are going to help you create other ideas or come up with other ideas for arguments you can use. So brainstorming is an incredibly effective. The brainstorming is an incredibly effective tool to use. So number 4 is decide upon a team line. Now that's an important, this is going to be an important idea once you get more confident with your debating. So a team line is basically like, what is the line of logic that your team is going to use to win this debate? So I suppose you could also look at the team line as, how does your team plan to present your idea of the topic of the debate? So, for example, if we go back to the topic that I was using before as an example, punching people. Now, if we were to think about one possible team line to take, and we're just thinking of different ideas here, we're not thinking about, again, like, do I agree with this or do I disagree with this? We're just trying to think of examples for our side of the debate. So, so for example, a team line would be, one team line could possibly be, one is punching people is acceptable. I don't personally believe that. I don't think you should just be able to walk up to somebody and punch them one. I think that's quite mean. That's quite bad. But for the sake of this debate, it is a team line that a team could realistically take. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean the people on that team really believe that. That's just the side of the debate. That's just the way they've decided to take the debate. So another one is punching people is not acceptable at all. So yeah, so we've got one that says, yep, it's okay, you can just punch anybody at any time. You've got another possible line that you could take. Punching people is not acceptable at all, regardless of the circumstances. And number 3, we've got punching people is acceptable in situations of self-defense. So if somebody attacks me first, I think it's okay if I attack them back to defend myself. And then you've got another one here. So we've got another one here. Punching people is acceptable if it is in a combat sports situation. So, for example, if you study boxing or karate or any one of these striking martial arts, if you study it and you compete and you have to go do your belt gradings to go up to the next level, things like that. Some people think it's acceptable to punch people in those situations. So you see how we've got four, I would say, completely different points of view there, all surrounding the same topic, which is punching people. So this is the beginning stage of starting to form your team's form your team's arguments, really, because first of all, you need to decide as a team, like, first of all, are you supposed to be opposing or are you supposed to be agreeing with this motion? With this topic. Number two, what's your reasoning for agreeing or disagreeing with it? So this is where this comes in, our team line. So then from here, we might pick one of these team lines. Get rid of all of this. So I've got more room again. Okay. So here, number 5, we're back to the brainstorming. And we have brainstorm ideas for arguments that defend your team line. Thank you, Mai. I was wondering where he got to. But yeah, so brainstorm ideas for arguments that defend your team line. So once you've decided, so for example, my team, I'm just going to pick one here. So I'm on the proposition team for this punching people debate. And my team line is going to be, it is appropriate to punch somebody in a situation of self-defense. So now I need to come up with arguments as to why it's acceptable to punch people if it's in self-defense. So, for example, I might start thinking along the lines of, well, if I don't defend myself, they might hurt me very severely, might put me in hospital, something like that, and I don't want to go to the hospital. That's a good reason. Another one is because if it was acceptable to punch anybody, like to just punch anybody for any reason, our whole society would probably just break down into a whole bunch of cavemen again, just going around punching people and taking stuff they want. So we've evolved to a point where, we have laws we have to follow. There are rules, things we can do, can't do. And yeah, they're there for a reason, so that we don't break down into like a crazy caveman society where everyone just punches everyone. So I'm starting to think of reasons now, ideas for arguments that can defend my team line of it's okay to punch people if it's in a self-defense situation. So yeah, so then we start just brainstorming, and don't just come up with 5 or 6 ideas. You want to probably come up with about 10 to 12 ideas. And your next strategy explains why you want more ideas than you'll need. So actually, I think it's number 7. Okay, so next we want to distribute the arguments to our teammates. It's number 7 that explains number 5. So number 6, distribute the arguments to your teammates and try to find a common theme to connect each speaker's arguments. So what that means is that, obviously all of these arguments are going to be along the same line. So in this example, it's again, punching people is acceptable like in self-defense situations. I've had these hiccups all day. I do apologize, guys. So what I mean by that is if I I'm gonna undo that green. Apologize, guys. I'm drawing a blank here. I'm trying to think of a good example of like a common thread of logic to connect a bunch of arguments together. I'm trying to think of a nice, simple. My brain has literally gone blank right now. Give me just a moment, guys. I'll think of something. I'm really drawing a blank right now. I'll make sure to post an example in the Zalo group when I can think of one properly. But basically, what you want to do is try and find the most logical line that connects all of your arguments. So how can I get from this argument to this argument by going in a straight line rather of just, so this argument leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, leads to this, rather than having to jump all over the page and go, well, this idea connects up there, which then connects with this over here, which goes over here. It makes sense when you think about that. You do this to get over here. So again, I really will provide a much better example of that in the Zalo group, but it really is an important step to developing your debate strategy. Make sure that there is one common theme amongst all of your own arguments. Okay, this is the one where number 5 makes sense. Okay, so number 7, get to work in researching your arguments, gathering your evidence to support them, and writing them out. So this is why we want to brainstorm more ideas than what we will need to present in the debate. Because you may think, yes, I've got 5 of the best arguments ever. No one is ever going to be able to disprove these arguments. I am so smart. Then what happens once you start researching for information on the internet and researching for evidence to use, and you can't find any evidence that supports one of these unbeatable arguments? Well, you can either use that argument anyway, and you'll probably get torn to shreds for not having any arguments, any evidence to support your argument, or you're going to have to think of another argument. And the reason we want to do that before we start researching is because once you start researching, then you're in the thick of your preparation. Like, you're really into the hard work. And if anything pops up that, that stresses you out, oh my gosh, like I've got to think of a new argument now, or oh no, what am I going to do? That can send you down into this spiral of, oh my gosh, like what am I going to do? Can't find any evidence. Need another argument. Got to think of the argument. Can't think of the argument. What am I going to do? But while you're calm and collected, if you and your team think of, all of these 12 to 15 different arguments, you each get given, say, 5, 6 arguments apiece. There, well, actually, it's really only the first two speakers that need them. So, so if each speaker has somewhere between 6 to 8 arguments to choose from in the list, the stress is gone. So if I go through my list of arguments and go, oh, easy, these first 5 arguments, I found all the these first 2 or 3 arguments, I found all the evidence I need. This is all good evidence. I can rely on it. It's going to do well. Boom. I can just write my arguments out and my part of the debate is done. Or, if you can't find evidence for one of the arguments, you go, oh, well, I can't find evidence for that. Well, I've got this other one here. No stress, because you've already got your contingency plan mapped out. So yeah, so really, I really want to emphasize that, because in the past, the two most common things I find with young debaters, and don't worry, this is a skill that you need to practice and develop. But the 2 things I find most common about young debaters, number 1, they don't prepare enough arguments. And number 2, they don't do the research to find the evidence to support their arguments. And so if you can just avoid those problems, that is probably 60% of the reason why people lose debates. Lack of preparation and not enough ideas. So if you get all that stuff out of the way early, all you've got to do is the easy stuff, is just writing out based on the research you found. So again, I stress, come up with way more arguments than you'll need. That way you're preparing yourself should the worst occur. Thank you very much. Chao Ka. It is arguments. It's not meant to be agreements. All right. Let's just pretend I spelt that right. Nope, no, that was the right one. I'm going mental here. Either way. So yeah, so get to work researching your arguments, gather your evidence to support them, and write them out. Okay, and number 8 is provide your teammates with regular updates and to your research and your writing, and hold regular team meetings. So keep it. So again, debating, at least the AP format, is very much a team sport. So if you're not communicating with your teammates, even the slightest even the slightest change to one of your arguments. So let's say in the last team meeting, you decide to write arguments 1, 2, and 3 for your speech. But let's say you can't find any information on argument 3, so you need to add argument 4. So now you've ended up with 1, 2, and 4. So the reason it's important to update your teammates is because if your first speaker introduces you and says, well, our second speaker, Mr. Michael, is going to be talking about arguments 1, 2, and 3, and then you go through your speech and deliver arguments 1, 2, and 4, but you don't mention argument 3, then your first speaker is going to look like he hasn't done his research or he hasn't done his preparation, because they should know what arguments you're going to be delivering. That's why they're telling everyone about it, to get them ready for it. So communicate all of these little updates with your teammates, because what you think might be annoying, silly, or pointless, or just a pain in the bum to your teammates, you're just going to annoy them by telling them this. That could be something that costs you the debate, because so a judge will always score you for the things you do right. They will never penalize you for something you've done wrong. So if you've earned 10 points and you do something wrong, they're not going to turn around and go, whoop, take 2 points off, they're down to 8 points. They'll let you stay at 10 points. You just won't earn any more points for that thing you did wrong. So if you get something wrong and cost your team a point because you didn't communicate that with your other teammates so they could fix it, then yeah, that could be costing you a point, and that point could be the point that allows your team to win the debate. So yeah, really, like, it's all about communication with your teammates, and it's all about working together to make sure you're all on the same page. And really, that is the be all and end all of debate strategy. So yeah, that brings us to the end of today's class. I'll post a homework task for you all. Next week there's no class because it's a public holiday, I believe. And then we'll be back in 2 weeks' time on the 18th with Mr. Brendan's next class, with Teacher Brendan's next class. So I'll post your homework in the Zalo group today. And goodness, I'll see you guys in 3 weeks' time.
Goodbye, teacher. Thanks. Goodbye, teacher.
You're welcome. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, teacher. Bye.